Hello and welcome again to the Discover Reading podcast. On this podcast, we'll be discussing the German election with Dr Christoph Arndt, who is an absolute expert in German elections, Scandinavian elections and British elections. And of course, we'll be focusing upon Germany, given the recent election there. For a listener's guide, it's important that you know that we recorded this episode on the 7th of October 2021, so you might have slightly more up-to-date information than we do, or indeed this information might be incredibly relevant given how long negotiations can take. It's also important for you all to be aware that we're going to speak about two different coalition systems. One is called the traffic light system, so red, yellow and green. The red is represented by the SDP, the yellow is represented by the FDP, and the green is represented by you guessed it, the Greens. The other option is known as the Jamaica system, with the black being represented by the CDU, the yellow being represented by the FDP, and the Greens still being represented by the Greens. We hope that will provide some guidance, and please do enjoy the episode. Okay, so this is a podcast we've been very much looking forward to, all about the recent German elections, and we've got an expert on to tell us all about it. So, Christoph, who are you? What is your journey to where you are now, and what do you currently do?
So, my name is Christoph Arndt. I'm a lecturer in comparative politics here at the Department of Politics and IR. I joined Reading in 2017. I'm from Germany, but I spent most of my professional career in Denmark. So I also got my PhD from the University of Aarhus some years ago. My research interests are parties, party politics, voting, elections, public opinion. And my focus is usually on the Scandinavian countries, Germany and the UK. So I do it from a comparative perspective. And currently I'm involved in some projects. For instance, I'm studying why and whether far-right parties sort of become an accepted partner for mainstream parties. And I'm also currently studying attitudes towards climate change policies.
Well, great to have you on the show, Christoph. And as Chris mentioned, you were keen to chat to you about the recent German elections. Obviously, a few weeks ago, Germany had a really exciting, a very closely run election. And so in terms of our first question, really, sort of what happened in that election, and more broadly, how does the German electoral system work?
So let's start with what really happened. So the CDU was in power for 16 years with Merkel as chancellor, and the CDU lost heavily, more than 8 percentage points, and it's now around like 24-25%. That was the weakest result in the CDU's history. And the SPD, so the Social Democrats, they gained a bit and became larger than the CDU. This has also been quite a while since this happened. And then the Greens, who were very strong in the polls, they lost considerably. I mean, they still got a decent result with more than 13%, and they were closely followed by the Liberal FDP gaining around 12%. And then we have the AfD on the right hand and the Left Party on the left-hand side of the party spectrum. And the AfD lost a bit, so they are around 10%. They got, somewhat surprisingly, they got none of the votes that the CDU lost, and the Left Party sort of failed to surpass the threshold, but it's still in the parliament. This has to do with the electoral system. So the German electoral system is a combination of first past the post, as we have in the UK, and a proportional list system. And at the end of the day, the seats are allocated proportionally for all parties that either got more than 5% of the votes, or at least won 3 single-member districts. So the Left Party managed to win 3 single-member districts, and this means it's still represented in the next Bundestag. So a combination of first past the post and proportional systems, and the proportional element is stronger at the end of the day.
Okay, 2 quick questions would come from the basis of what you said, Christoph. So first of all, why did this happen? How did the CDU end up losing 8 percentage points. And then also, secondly, I mean, you see these parties quite, if you want, neck and neck in the end result. In the UK, it feels like it will be chaos. But in Germany, is there a bit more consensus? Does it make it easier for the parties to do deals because there's more consensus in terms of, if you want, major topics or willingness to work with each other?
I mean, the CDU, they were polling quite well at the end of this COVID thing. So it's still going on, but it's no longer really a pandemic, so to speak. Infection rates have been low. And until summer, the CDU was polling quite well, and they tried to continue Merkel's strategy to avoid any controversial issue. But that at the end of the day failed because the frontrunner Armin Laschet was quite unpopular and obviously the wrong choice. The CDU could choose, so to speak, between two frontrunners, either Armin Laschet, who's the prime minister of the largest state, North Rhine-Westphalia, or the prime minister of Bavaria, Markus Söder. Söder was clearly more popular among the voters, but for whatever reason, so some internal reasons, they chose Laschet, who's more unpopular, and then the polls for the CDU were crumbling since summer. The other question, I mean, it's obviously a consensus system. Germany has been always governed by coalitions, but usually the CDU or the SPD could lead a coalition as clearly the largest party. So historically, both parties could poll more than 40%, and then they could choose a smaller coalition partner. So you had like coalitions of one party 40% and the other party 5 to 10%. So you had like a stable two-party coalition for most of the elections since 49. This time will be the first time since the 1950s where we need three parties to form a majority coalition.
Okay, fantastic. What I've been reading about the German election is that, am I right, we're in a situation now where there are parties that could act as kingmakers? So you've got the parties that did quite well in the elections, and then the ones that got more than 5% but not as well. How does that work? Are those seen as kingmakers at the moment?
I mean, yeah, true. So both the Greens and the FDP, they gained, and they are seen as kingmakers because except from another grand coalition between CDU and SPD, no realistic coalition option can be formed. So there was sort of rumors about a red-green cabinet, so SPD plus Greens plus Left Party, but this combination did not get the majority. And the AfD is out of all coalition talks, so the only realistic coalitions would always include the Greens and the FDP.
And I know often what's quite common, you see in quite a lot of political campaigns, good old political gaff. One of the remarkable things about Merkel is when you think about her time as Chancellor, she was quite gaff-free for a politician. I mean, I think famous political gaffes, in Britain, you've got William Hague going on a roller coaster with his baseball cap. You've got Ed Miliband trying to eat a bacon sandwich and then falling down the stairs. They do happen, but there was quite a bad one, I think, for Armin Laschet. I was reading about it because obviously Germany had some very difficult floods over the summer. And then was there an incident where Laschet was, if you want, seen laughing? And if so, just how much do you think that impacted his standing? Or do you think actually we put too much attention on these gaffes and they don't change too much of the way people vote?
I mean, the media would obviously focus on this situation, and they like this. Bad news is good news. And what Laschet did was he was laughing in the background when the president of Germany was speaking during the ceremony. I think more than 160 persons died in Armin Laschet's home state. And there was a ceremony for those people, and Armin Laschet was standing in the background and laughing. And the media, obviously, they spot these things, and then there was made a sort of campaign out of it. I mean, it was costly. The question is whether it was the only reason why Laschet lost so much. I mean, he was clearly more unpopular than the alternative, Markus Söder. And every week, the sort of sister party of the CDU, they came with some attacks on their own frontrunner because, I mean, Söder was seen as the real candidate among the rank and file of the Christian Democrats, while Laschet was seen as the elite candidate, and this tension covered almost the whole campaign. So the laughing in the background damaged Laschet, but I don't think that he would perform much better either.
What changes do you think we could see, Christoph, if domestically the CDU, and it looks like it will be, is forced from power?
Yeah, I mean, the sort of talks are still going on, and there is a chance that the CDU could end up in a Jamaica coalition. But currently, it's more likely that a traffic light coalition is formed, and this would mean that the CDU would be in opposition for the first time since like 16 years. And yeah, first and foremost, this would mean like you have power struggles within the party, and the party would be paralyzed at least for some months. Because in the last 16 years, it was all about Merkel, and now several sort of senior figures see the chance of sort of leading the party or replacing Laschet as the current party chairman, and this means internal power struggle, and the party will be paralyzed. For the other parties, I mean, it depends who will get the positions through in the coalition talks. So if the FDP will get a lot of its policies through, then perhaps we don't see many changes. So the FDP wants status quo, at least on taxes and so on. The Greens want more climate change policies. The SPD wants a higher minimum wage. That could be a compromise between the three parties, but they also want higher taxes for the wealthy and so on. And these are things that are currently going on. And it depends a bit who gets what in the coalition talks.
Okay, so what do you see being the kind of the biggest things the parties will disagree on? Are there any aspects or policies that you think they can't overcome them? They're just diametrically opposed in their views on things?
Yeah, there's one big gap is between the SPD and the FDP on taxes. So the Social Democrats want higher taxes on high incomes, and also they want to reintroduce a tax on fortune and inheritance tax, and the FDP opposes all these things. And then between the FDP and the Greens, you have disagreements regarding climate change policies. So the Greens want more bans, they want speed limits on the German motorways. The Greens want also sort of ban some forms of cars and also some forms of energies, while the FDP wants market solutions, so that the market should solve these problems in saving CO2. So there's one gap between the SPD and FDP on mostly taxes and redistribution, and the other one is between the Greens and the FDP on climate change. These are currently the biggest gaps. There could be more, but if you follow the German media, these are two largest disagreements between the coalition partners or potential coalition partners.
Excellent. Now, for our British listeners, Christoph, just a quick question in terms of how the UK Greens differ from the equivalent in Germany. What's the difference between the two?
I mean, the one difference is that the British Greens are a small party, but the electoral system also keeps them small. They win 1 or 2 constituencies every general election, but not much more. So the electoral system is a barrier for the British Greens, whereas the Germans, so they got established during the 80s, and that could develop the party since. I mean, if you're a very small party, there's always a tendency that you become more extreme or that you stick to extreme positions, whereas if you have become a mainstream party, you're at some point forced to sort of either have a broader platform or to at least moderate some of your core claims. So this is always a struggle within the German Greens, that you have the so-called Realos, so those who want sort of realistic policies and govern, and then the so-called Fundi, so people with fundamental views on climate change and the environment rather would be in opposition. And the British ones, I mean, they have no realistic chance to enter government so far. This is one core difference.
Okay, have we seen the Greens growing in Germany kind of year on year, or have they been quite powerful for a long time?
No, so there were times where they performed rather bad, like they were in the government between 98 and 2005, but this was also, associated with bad pollings on the state level because the party made some compromises with the Social Democrats. So there was a period where they came close to the 5% threshold. Then they improved a bit, and with these current climate change debates, they sort of got big again. So it's a party that can end up close to the 5% threshold if the sort of agenda is not in their own favor, but they can also grow to 15 to 18% if the political agenda is in their favor.
And when it comes to the process of, if you will, forming the government, deciding who will get what jobs, I suppose from a British audience perspective, the closest coalition we've got in living memories, the Conservatives and the Lib Dems, where basically the Conservatives took the majority of the good jobs and the Lib Dems got a few others. How does it work in Germany? How do they decide which party takes which seat or which position of power in the government?
I mean, previous coalitions worked a bit like the Conservative Lib Dem coalition. There was one big partner, one small partner, and the big partner could obviously choose these attractive ministries and positions, and then the smaller partner could get some symbolic ministries, or especially those ministries they had campaigned on. So the FDP was often the small coalition partner. They campaigned on the economy and finance, so they either got the finance ministry or the Ministry of Economic Affairs. When the Greens enter a coalition, they get the Ministry of Environment. So this was often the deal when you have one big party and one small party, but nowadays the rules are a bit different because together the Greens and the Liberals are larger than both of the potential coalition partners. So this means half or more than half of all the positions and ministers would go to the Greens and the FDP. So the largest party would be left with like around half of the ministries. This is a difference to previous coalitions we had.
Great. And then I'm just thinking more widely as well. What do the different kind of possible coalition outcomes mean for Europe and the world more widely? And then also sort of linked to that, assuming the Greens form part of the coalition, will this lead to climate policy taking central stage alongside perhaps a distancing of Germany from close ties with Putin's Russia?
I mean, the Greens obviously have the environment and climate change as one of their core issues. So they want more ambitious climate change policies. And they also made this as a condition for any coalition with either the CDU or SPD. For Europe, I don't think there's a large difference between the Jamaica option and the traffic light option. All parties would be pro-European, and there won't be large differences. Like the largest difference would have been if either the AfD on the right flank or the left party would have been included in our coalition, but this is not realistic. So in any case, I would think that both coalition options will sort of stick to a pro-European policy. What can be different is the stance on Russia, because both the Greens and the FDP are not Russophile parties. So a Jamaica coalition with the CDU would have a more skeptical view on Russia and Russia's current attempts to use energy as a weapon, whereas traffic light with the SPD would perhaps be a bit more Russia-friendly, because the SPD has been traditionally more Russophile, especially since the 70s. Traffic light, more Russia-friendly. Jamaica, more skeptical about Russia if we use this case.
That's interesting, because I suppose in the UK, Merkel has the perception of somebody who was quite close to her, or at least had, let's say, a professional, proactive relationship with Vladimir Putin. Was she a little bit out of kilter with the rest of her party there, or is it just that the UK media is misreading her relationship with Putin?
So Merkel, the CDU under Merkel, also supported most of the sanctions against Russia in recent years. What is a bit different is that Germany, in contrast to the UK, always, or not always, but usually wants to have like at least working relationships with Russia. That has historical reasons, but also is in this east-west or the east-west cleavage in Germany, that the eastern Länder, so the states, have a more positive view on Russia. And as you know, Merkel is from the eastern state, Mecklenburg, and so she wants at least to have some working relations with Russia. There's perhaps a personal thing here that Putin speaks somewhat okay German, and Merkel speaks Russian, thanks to her origin from Eastern Germany. And this is usually not the case that any senior UK politician is fluent in Russian. So this is a personal thing that Merkel can speak with Putin either in Russian or in some basic German.
That's interesting. And I was wondering, in terms of Merkel, what do you think her long-term legacy will be? Is she finishing her term in politics very favourably in public opinion, or do you think things have dipped over the years?
I think this depends a bit whom you ask, because there are people who thought there was 16 good years because she didn't do any real harm. But on the other hand, there are many people who would criticize Merkel for the Eurozone crisis some years ago, for the asylum seeker crisis. That it was her who invited more than 1 million refugees to Germany and also to neighbor countries. And both the Greens and the FDP are currently criticizing that there's a lot of unfinished business. So one of Merkel's strategies was the so-called issue avoidance strategy. So whenever there's a polarizing issue, try to avoid it and sort of adapt to the position of either the public mood or the zeitgeist in the media. So this is one sort of critical issue with Merkel's style of government, that she did this convergence to the media or the public mood, and then a lot of things have been left unfinished.
And I think just to focus upon Germany's global standing, modern Germany, without doubt, at least from British point of view, has a reputation for pragmatism, stable politics, and I think globally it's seen definitely as being a sensible country and a sensible partner. In fact, Obama, his last ever meeting was with Merkel, and I've been reading his autobiography, and that's definitely something which comes across his viewpoint in terms of Germany as being sensible. I'd be interested to know, Christoph, do you think that this reputation is completely justified? And if so, do you think that there's a danger that this reputation could be threatened in the years ahead?
For the second one, I don't think it will really get damaged, because none of the two realistic coalition options will be like changing things drastically. So I mean, both would sort of be pro-European, as I mentioned, and both Jamaica and the traffic light would have a strong interest in maintaining good relations to the United States. For the first question, actually, there was some pragmatism in Merkel's policy, but also some unilateral decisions that other countries were not really following. So the refugee policy of Merkel was totally different compared to neighbor countries like Austria or Denmark, which had a much more restrictive view on refugees and migrations from non-Western countries. And they actually accused Germany for like attracting and pulling all the refugees from the Middle East. So this view of Merkel being pragmatic or Germany being pragmatic is not always shared, and there were other decisions like unilateral abandoning of a nuclear power, which meant that German energy prices were skyrocketing within a few years. So this was a short-sighted decision after this Fukushima incident in Japan, that German nuclear power was phased out in a rather short period, and this led to the skyrocketing of energy prices, and this has also some repercussions for neighbor countries.
And you mentioned at the start that some of your research interest looks at perhaps more extreme politics. Obviously, the outcome of this German election looks like it will be, not a massive change from what's gone previously. But do you think there will be a change in coming years more of a change to German politics, or for the foreseeable, will it be quite stable and more of what we've seen in previous years?
I mean, this also depends a bit on what sort of policies are pursued under the next government. I mean, if it's like mainly status quo maintenance, then we see also no bigger changes, I would suspect. There are also questions what will happen with the CDU if they are in opposition. If the infighting continues, if the party is completely paralyzed, they might lose further votes, especially in the state elections next year. And then there's the question what happens on the center right and right, because currently the AfD was not able to sort of capitalize on this. They didn't get any votes from the CDU because they are seen as too extreme. So, but there's also the internal struggle within the AfD between the moderates who seek cooperation with the CDU, at least in the long run, and like a more extreme wing who wants clear policies, no cooperation with any other policies, and so the real deal. Either we get 100% or we don't cooperate with other parties, and this can also mean that the party might split during the next year or two. And similarly, will the left party recover? So the left party got below 5%. It was rescued by the 3 single-member districts won in the east, but the question is, will they make a real comeback, or are they stuck around 5% and will have difficulties in re-entering the Bundestag in the future? This also depends on the strategy of the SPD and the Greens. If the SPD and the Greens move to the left, then the niche for the left party would obviously smaller and smaller. If they go to the center, then the niche for the left party would obviously get bigger, and there's a somewhat larger chance of a real comeback.
Interesting. And yeah, I'm going to squeeze in 2 questions. First one, extremely quick. When will we know, or when are we likely to know, the decision of all these various negotiations? How long will it take? And then also, second, I thought it was very interesting earlier on, Christoph, that you mentioned that due to the system, parties like the Green, for example, has had to go and moderate because there's a realistic notion that they could be part of the government. And that is very much, if you want, the effect of a consensus system. Do you think that that is a good example of where maybe having a consensus system is more sensible than having a majority system like we're more used to in the UK, where one party wins all? And actually, this gives other parties the opportunity to come in, get involved, and better represent people's opinions and perspectives.
So for the second question, yeah, I mean, the majoritarian system, it creates stable majorities usually. In the UK, for almost all elections, either the Conservative Party or the Labour Party, they can form a government. And a majority government. The German system with the 5% threshold also means that very small parties have no chances of getting in, and for the remaining parties, especially those on the fringes, there's the strategic choice between being pure and staying in your niche, and then you have some core voters that are sort of happy about this pure stance, or moderate and go for a coalition with another party. This is the typical choice you have to make as a sort of smaller or medium-sized party in a multi-party system. Be more moderate, open the chance of being part of a government, or staying in your niche and make your core supporters happy, but nobody else. And the first question, it can take until Christmas or even longer. So the last coalition talks, they took until Christmas or even January. Then they broke down because the FDP stepped out of the Jamaica negotiations last time, and then another grand coalition was formed in early 2018 actually. So we might have to wait until Christmas or a bit longer, and this also depends a bit on whether some of the sort of controversial issues can be solved easily and rather quickly, or they remain on the table forever, and then so that the talks go on and on and on, and Merkel will still be chancellor by Christmas.
Wow. So yeah, it could be quite a bit more time. But yeah, I think I've learned a lot more from talking to you about the German elections. Chris, have you got any final questions before we sign off?
No, I think that's everything from me. Just to say a massive thank you for coming on, Christoph. And Snap with Phil, you definitely taught me a lot as well, and hopefully our audience too.
Okay, thank you also from my side. It was a pleasure.
Thanks a lot. Cheers, Christoph.
Yes.
Wow, that was a fantastic in-depth analysis of the German election and also of how German party politics works in general. With Merkel standing down as leader of the CDU, it is the end of an era, and this was always going to be a really interesting German election. So a massive thank you to Christoph for guiding us through all the ins and outs of this important topic. Next up on the podcast, me and Chris will be speaking to Dr. Fola Adiemo from our law department about her research into aspects of banking law, such as whistleblower protection and unexplained wealth, and also her experiences of life as an academic, juggling both teaching and research. We hope you join us for that, but till then, look after yourselves and goodbye.